Good morning, it's 5:59 a.m. This is Studio Practice episode 24. This is going to be a comment response video in relationship to our last episode that dealt with critique. Episode 23 was entitled Our Critique is Broken, Now Fix It. It was effectively my complaints about how I see the process of critique within cultural production being misunderstood and misused. You can click right here to watch that original video. All of the comments last week centered on the issues that I raised in the video. Let's take a look at some of those comments now. Nathan Tremy asked if I would describe or show real-life examples of effective critique methodology, and my response to Nathan, which I was very serious about, is, do you have a free Thursday? I'm offered to host Nathan here in the studio on a Thursday to view effective critique methodology. Nathan, if you're interested, send me a private message. So comments from both Mitch Goldstein and Devos Advocate involved the idea of how do some of these concepts translate to an undergraduate teaching environment, given that calling a work into crisis may not be the most effective way to help instruct. Now, I completely agree, and I think that there's a fundamental paradox at play. I think that the further back you go in an educational trajectory, the more the kind of acculturation and assimilation process, the idea of getting with the program and having clearly defined guideposts comes into play. Instruction, I believe, is a critical component of learning at almost any level. It's just a question of what the right context for that is. So when an undergraduate student is attempting to learn the fundamentals of typography or the fundamentals of painting or composition, oftentimes I do think that it's very important to provide concrete instruction. Now is critique the right moment for that, and what's the nature of the classroom? Devos Advocate lays out a fairly succinct form of how to deal with undergraduate students in the critique environment, which is to ask the questions and to let the students bridge that intellectual gap, to have them make the connection rather than be so explicit, I believe, in your explanations. However, I do think that the stupider the student you're dealing with, the more explicit you need to be. You know, one of the great paradoxes of teaching, one of the great paradoxes of teaching is the fact that the smarter the student, the less work you have to do. And as an example, when you have 30 people in a class and you're running a critique in a studio critique that lasts 4 hours on a Friday afternoon, you can basically do the math on how much time you're going to spend with each one of those students. Now, I have the luxury of working with graduate students in a very unusual environment where we don't have those types of time constraints. So I do believe that the further back in an artist, a designer, a writer, a poet, a cultural producer's trajectory you go, the more role, the greater the role is for concrete suggestion. As the individual develops, the critical component is the development of critical thinking. Chris Coate and Alexander Wirtz both had questions involving the process of calling a work into crisis. I'm going to attempt to address them now. I'm going to read just a tiny portion of it. Says here, I've been in art school for 3 weeks now and want to establish good habits. It's easy to prescribe solutions just as to contribute something to the critique circle, as in, bam, I said something equals contributed something. Check, next person's turn. Can you clarify through examples good ways to call work into crisis to avoid this bullshit? Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think the most important component in terms of principles are pretty simple. The first point is to avoid approval seeking in all shapes and forms and to rely on the truth as you understand it. What do I mean by this? I mean that oftentimes when offering criticism, an individual is trying to calculate their social standing within a group. And I think it's critically important to realize that respect is far more important than popularity. I mean, drive all of your comments back to physical material evidence within the work, as in your specific use of this God motif in relationship to this semi-futuristic alien head, seems to speak to a profound alienation, a kind of alienation that the human condition feels in the face of the spiritual experience. But the point that I'm getting at is to drive the criticism and to show evidence of the criticism back in the work. Chris, relentlessly and mercilessly drive your criticism back to evidence in the work. I would suggest that you always begin with the principle of charity. What does this mean? This means that when approaching a work, you primarily and initially approach the work as if it is perfect in its articulation. You're charitable towards the work. You look at the work and you assume that the work is exactly as it should be, and you speak to the potential of the work first. After having done this, you look for evidence that the thing might not be perfect in its articulation, relying on the principle of correspondence, that your comments correspond to a great degree to the thing that's in front of you. Alexander Wirtz, Jim Burton, and Christopher Coate, I hope these comments help address your fundamental question. I also received some excellent feedback from Cedric, who pointed me to point number 3 in his comment. It also seems to have similar themes but different conclusions that I found in, quote, "During the exhibition, the gallery will be closed, Contemporary Art and the Paradoxes of Conceptualism by C.H. Van Winkle." For example, quote, "The intended separation of conception and execution, the replacement of a realized work by an open description or instruction, threaten to destroy the very foundation of quality judgment. If every execution," and I think this is the point, if every execution is a good execution and any result a good result, what else is there to say about it? The disregard of conceptual artists for the accepted modernist quality criteria undermined and ridiculed the position of everyone involved in judging works of art. Cedric, I don't know that it's he, states, "In the book somewhere is a description of how one could judge contemporary art based on design principles that also reflects on the process behind the making, not just judging the discrete work itself." Cedric, I looked for C.H. Van Winkle's book. I found a PDF of their thesis, which I'm currently reading. I find it interesting, and I thank you for pointing me in this direction. Till next time.